That's what it sounds like. And we go to one of the voices you just heard, a seasoned prosecutor, Andrew Weissmann, who was Robert Mueller's deputy in that Russia Mueller probe, has also worked at the FBI, knows these issues inside and out. And I know you don't necessarily take sheer emotional pride in it, but there's been many an account of people getting more nervous when you have been assigned to prosecute their cases. Welcome, sir.
Nice to be here.
We played some of what you just said there, and you've obviously followed the news accounts I mentioned. Multiple stories with different emphases, but I think it's fair to say the overall point is that this DOJ is doing certain things that look like they are going up the political line to government elites, White House officials, looking at conduct, including then President Trump's, whatever jargon people want to use. And that's striking because Beat viewers, in my experience, Andrew, they keep a close eye on this, so they recall many that you were one of these voices saying in the middle of the hearings the DOJ looked like it wasn't doing enough. By virtue of the evidence, they were surprised by some of what was in the hearings. Explain where we are now.
So I think the most significant thing that happened was actually the Lester Holt interview with the Attorney General, because what you saw there was the Attorney General, who by all accounts is, a straight shooter and a truth teller, saying, one, if the proof is there, I'm going forward. In other words, he was very, very direct with Lester Holt about, nobody is above the law. I thought that was really good. I also thought what was good is the way he framed the investigation as not being solely about what happened on January 6th, but rather anybody who was interfering with the lawful transfer of power.
Now, I have to nerd out on you, and then I'll let you continue. But do you think that's because that was his governing legal theory? Or do you think that's because he read your article, which made waves, at least in legal circles?
I certainly am not going to say because he read my article. That's what changed it. I do think, if you remember, the Attorney General said he was going to be listening very closely and watching the hearings, either live or later. And that was the governing theory and the way in which the evidence rolled out. I mean, my op-ed was not original in saying that you should look at this holistically. I listened to the hearings and said, gee, that's the way you should be proceeding. My concern was whether the Department of Justice was essentially picking up what they were putting down. And I think what the Attorney General said to Lester Holt was that he was proceeding in a sort of broad way. Obviously, the proof is going to be in the pudding, and just to use a lot of hackneyed metaphors, but we're going to have to wait and see whether he's going to carry out his very strong statements to Lester.
Yeah, and I take your point that others had observed that, although you were probably one of the most high-ranking recent DOJ prosecutors, certainly from a special counsel probe, but really, period, that had aired that out in public in that way. And you told us that DOJ folks responded. Stay with me here as we remind everyone about the other pieces of news here, because the DOJ also got the phone records of these Trump officials, including Mark Meadows, who successfully ducked the House committee. Then you have, as mentioned, that interesting A.G. Garland interview with Lester Holt. Let's listen to a bit of that.
There's been a lot of criticism, a lot of pressure that the DOJ is kind of behind the power curve here, behind the committee, not moving quickly enough on what appears to be solid evidence in some cases.
As I said, we have been moving urgently since the very beginning. We have a huge number of prosecutors and agents working on these cases. It's a fundamental tenet of what we do as prosecutors and investigators is to do it outside of the public eye.
Andrew?
So I think everything he said is fair. I would have some follow-ups to that. I doubt he would answer them, but I think that he somewhat elided the nature of the investigation, because everyone knows that there was a very active investigation into the people who actually attacked the Capitol.
Sure.
I'd be very interested in when they proceeded on a sort of broader investigation. And also, I'm really interested in who's on that investigation, how many prosecutors and agents I don't think that's a terribly secret thing. I mean, that's something that was revealed in the Enron investigation and the special counsel investigation. But, that is all looking backwards. But it would be nice to know going forward just exactly how big the staff is and have a little bit better sense of the remit, even though I understand that the Attorney General is unlikely to name names. It would be nice to know what exactly is the scope of the investigation. Is it just fake electors? Is it the DOJ scheme? Or is it, as we would say, the whole enchilada that they're going to really look at?
It's dinner time on the East Coast. You're making me a little hungry. But you mentioned that we can kind of go through some of what you just referred to, because you have the seditious conspiracy, which also obviously and inherently includes the violence of the 6th. You have obstructing a government proceeding, which a lot of lawyers have said is the straight up thing that was sabotaging the 6th. Then you have the elector fraud, which, of course, is separate, Andrew, because elector fraud, like voter fraud, can be its own independent crime, even if it's done by a random citizen. And then you have the question of how elector fraud was, according to the evidence that's emerged, going to be the pretext or, and stay with me here, but I'm not going to use a legal term, the big, obvious, knowing lie that would be invoked by people on the 6th, by the members of Congress or Pence, according to the memos that we've now obtained. Right. Do those all congeal into one giant conspiracy that Donald Trump benefits from?
So this after a thorough investigation will really be a question of what is the strongest way to charge it. Personally, I view this as one conspiracy. If you're thinking of charging Donald Trump, he is the head of this, and he engaged in a multifaceted conspiracy, and it's pretty simple. He wanted to stay in office, even though he lost the election. And so all of these are components of how he did that, with all sorts of backup plans and fail-safes, with a culmination being January 6th, because that's when the vote was actually going to happen. But that day itself was just the end date of, of the scheme. But there's a lot that happened before then. And again, if you look at the Attorney General's language yesterday, I think he clearly was signaling that he understands that this is not just about the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th.
Yeah, which, as you say, is vital if we're going to deal with this as a national security event, an attempted coup. Now I'm going to go deep in the weeds with you. Are you ready to go weed whacking?
Ready.
You remember your colleague, Andrew Goldstein?
Yeah, of course.
Mueller team.
Terrific guy.
Yeah. I should mention, by way of full disclosure, we did invite him on the program. He's currently passed. Invites open. We have a lot of different people on. But he is saying here in public that the, quote, considerations when you talk about a political leader are different and harder. You have the very clear and important rule the DOJ should try in every way possible not to interfere with elections, to not take steps using the criminal process that could end up affecting the political process. Now, I know you all hold each other in high regard, but that's really pretty far, if not opposite, of what you've been saying in public. He seems to be suggesting that enforcing the law itself could be perceived as affecting the political process, so there should be a different, or he says, harder, more intricate standard if Donald Trump is or becomes a candidate. In some ways, he's acting like a candidate in waiting. And I'm curious if you're going to be straight with us or just be really nice and euphemistic because you guys are respected colleagues, but both of you can't be right. And this matters. And so I'm curious if tonight you can settle once and for all what's going on, because he sounds, I'm going to keep it high level and then the audience will hear you, but I would tell everyone, he sounds like Comey 1.0. If someone can accuse us of somehow being political, then we should act differently to avoid that accusation. Now you've handed the keys over to people, sometimes bad faith actors, making accusations. You sound like something different, which is saying, go forward and follow the evidence. Who's right?
Well, of course, I'm right. So that's a pretty easy question. But I have to say, once you accused my colleague, Mr. Goldstein, of being Comey-esque, those are harsh words.
Only depending on who hears them, but go ahead.
Yeah. So what I would say is I there's a very interesting, to be really nerdy, article that came out of the New York Review of Books on this issue about what is the proper role of the Attorney General, and should he be considering things like what this will do to the country and the divisiveness, or whether you're giving a platform to Trump if he gets indicted to continue his shenanigans. And it basically said those are not proper considerations for the Attorney General. Those might be appropriate things for the president to consider in deciding whether to pardon or not pardon. But the Attorney General has a very narrow focus of applying the Justice Manual.
Just to build on that,
the Attorney General said that yesterday.
You're saying that Garland, in your view, is going that direction. I mean, Goldstein and Comey are just talking about this endless politicization as the defense to politicization, which just doesn't make logical sense. And I would add to your concern, there is no real reason to think that an American jury of 12 people randomly selected would not also take into consideration whether they want to see a former president, whoever it may be, actually incarcerated. They have their judgment and jury nullification if it gets to that point. But you would say people like Goldstein then are getting this wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I have to see the full context, and that's my sort of being, little, giving them the benefit.
I read the quote.
I'd like to know sort of a little bit more about what his thinking was, but I don't think that you should be considering anything other than what's in the Justice Manual. I agree with Merrick Garland that there's a narrow scope to the role in what you're supposed to be considering. And whether it's divisive or not cannot be one of the factors for the Justice Department. What I hope is that we get to the point, Ari, where this academic and nerdy discussion we're having is one that becomes, really live and we're really dealing with it because, we're months from now, we're discussing, a really active investigation where we really suspect charges are going to be brought imminently. I do think that's a ways away, unfortunately.
Well, understood. And you have been there and been in these hard calls and made these decisions. So we wanted to hear from you. And I appreciate you being our leadoff one-on-one guest here, Andrew Weissmann.